Xiang Lanxin is Zijiang Chair Professor at East China Normal University in Shanghai.
China for a long time prefer to see a triangular relationship or triangular play, so to speak, between US, Europe and China. But unfortunately, Europe did not take on that role, and the European made miscalculations the last few years in particular. I would say since 2019, when they start talking about China being systemic rival. Now, this is one of the worst mistakes the EU authority made. Since that time, there is no real triangular relationship because EU prefer to stay with US, hoping, to align with US to deal with China. That's the meaning of a systemic rival, supposed to be, and eventually also develop into something called de-risking policy vis-a-vis economic relation with China. Now, what the EU mistake has become obvious because it is finally realizing that it's falling between two stools, between China and the US. It is the United States that changed position. EU realized US become totally unreliable. There is no transatlantic agenda seriously on China because US does not need Europe. So this is something I think Wang Yi particularly tried to explain.
In that way, from the European side, about becoming too dependent on China, Wang Yi said that interdependence is not a risk and that intertwined interests are not a threat. But is that something that European leaders can take seriously as they try to be more strategically autonomous from the United States?
Well, they have been talking about that since 2018, since von der Leyen, the first came to the position of the European leadership. But they never pursue it. So-called the strategic autonomy means very little when Europe did not really play the role, as China would hope, as a third serious pole of the international system. As you say, the triangular relation. But the EU last few years chose to marginalize itself because they really depended on transatlantic tie. It's not a question that they depend on China per se. It's mainly depending on transatlantic tie. That tie is no longer dependable.
What do you think China's message to the world is amid today's geopolitical turmoil, and how does it see its role?
I think, the message is very clear. China is the leading defender of the UN system. And Wang Yi actually used the expression China being the most important factor for world peace. We used to be more modest, saying we are one of the leading factors. But now Wang Yi tried to say we are the most important factor for keeping world peace, because we don't want to go back to jungle rules.